Mac check 1001, 1002, 1003. So today I want to talk about, when you design a product or service, the only two aspects you need to think about. So the picture I'm showing you on the left is basically called, value creation or value capture. And so basically the definition is, any value generated, throughout the product or service, whether it's to the suppliers, whether it's how much you sell to the customers and their willingness to pay and how much, lost opportunities are there, that's value created. So it's a three part, the lost opportunity, the value you have captured, and the cost that you're buying the raw materials or the labor you buy to produce the service or the product. And the value you captured for the company is the difference between whether the customer is paying for the product or service minus the cost of building that product or create that service. So when you think about that, the way you work as different functions in your corporate organization, you basically need to do two things. The first thing is you either need to drive down the cost so you can have a better, value being captured, or you drive up the price towards the maximum level the customer are willing to pay, called willingness to pay. That's how you're going to generate money for the firm you're working at. And basically, the way you do that, to drive up the prices, you have to create the product differentiation, a unique, a totally different than the competitor's product. It doesn't have to be totally different, but you need to have some differentiation compared to what the competitors are doing. And those differentiations are aligned with the customer's interest, so they're willing to pay more for it. You're never going to know how much the customer, the maximum amount they're willing to pay. But what you can do is once you drive up the product differentiation, and you can drive up the price. And that's one way of doing it. And the other way of doing it is you drive down the cost of building that product or create that service. There are many ways you can do that. If you go back to the early days of McDonald's, they used to be a dad's shop, burger flip, shop, it's just one location. But once they figured out, how to standardize the processes and basically have, a standard operating procedures of making a burger, they can drive down the cost. But I'm not gonna go into how McDonald's is actually making money. Then definitely not driving any costs down. They're trying to, but that's not how they make money. They're making money by real estate. But I'm not gonna cover that today. Today I'm gonna talk about how you actually do that. You can create more values for the customers and also capture more values for your firm is, like I said, two ways. Product and differentiation, where you drive up the price, and then your cost leadership, where you drive down the cost. That's a two way to do it, and I'll give you a good example. So the example I'm going to give you is Tesla. Uh, Everybody knows Tesla. Elon built the company, and actually he's really, really good, not just as an engineer, but also as a businessman. Because fundamentally, what he was trying to achieve with Tesla cars, in this case, Model Y, they're trying to create a product that has high differentiation. It's excellent in software. It works just like your iPhone. Very simple, user friendly. You can get to it, understand how the cars work, instantly, right? And one can argue, it's not as simple as some of the old-fashioned internal combustion engine cars. But I can guarantee you, if you want to make some factory change, it's much easier to do it in Tesla. They have software advantage. Not only it works like an iPhone, but also have full self-driving in the future coming in. So it's like a software, and the hardware itself is also excellent comparing to what others are doing. For example, you have better performing glasses, on the car, so they don't become so hot. And also, the car has many hardwares that solves the issue of the ride quality, the acoustics, the noise level. So you're buying the software plus the hardware plus a really good looking car. Well, arguably a really good looking car. So you have that differentiation, in software, in hardware, and a future forward-looking aesthetic of Model Y for the product differentiation. So the customers are willing to pay a little bit extra for that. And there's another thing, they're doing really excellent is a cost reduction. If you look at this car, it's actually built in a really simple way. They have built the Giga Press. So basically, instead of having different frame parts, being bolted together or welded together, they have Giga Press. So basically, in one shot, you make the frame by pressing the metals together. And also inside the part, you have all the parts that Tesla is using is simplified SKUs. For example, in the early days, when the gear shifter, it's actually the same parts as a Mercedes-Benz, S-Class or E-Class, I can't remember. But they have very simplified SKUs. They can outsource it, But, recent years, they become so vertically integrated, their cost leadership is just unbeatable. They're doing the cars with a much better margin and a much simplified process and a better cost structure. And also, if you look at the car today, you're buying. If you go to a dealership, you say, I want to buy a Porsche. There's a bazillions of options you can buy from Porsche. And actually it confuses customers. And it also confuses, the people who is actually going to build the car. Because if you put a green color, you want Alcantara, interior, different color, you want this function, that function. If you think about, that possibility of how many options you can have in a Porsche, I can guarantee you can have 1 million options if you really make the small changes here and there. But for Tesla, they build the car and they sell the car to you just like an Apple product. So if you go to Apple's website, you want to buy a Mac, there's only a handful of choices you can do. It is simplified the options and makes the factory much easier to build the cars, all the products you're buying. They lowered the cost. So I'll give you a different example. In my previous industry, we have a highly customizable products. And most of the time, the people, the operator, the technician who build the product actually spends tons of time not building the product, but going to the inventory, looking for the parts they need to build the product. And those labor hours adds up into your cost structure of your product. Because it's basically raw materials, your labor cost, your overhead, everything. So if you can lower that, you have a much better, value being captured by your firm. So like I said, Tesla, they're doing it at the same time, product differentiation and the cost leadership. And in some cases, you can just do one part and you'll still win the market. But when next time you think about building products, I encourage you to think about how I can drive up the product differentiation that aligns with the market and the customer are willing to pay a little bit extra for that or even more. And the other thinking I want you to have is, apart from the building the product differentiation, how might I build that product or create a service that has a really low cost so I can have better margins compared to my competitors? That's how you need to think about, building a product and, creating a service for the firm you work at.